This is Metro Week. Our top story, Pima County borrowing. We'll talk to the head of an advisory group that crafted a proposal asking voters to raise taxes for construction projects.
We've met 19 times in the last 2 years. On average, we've probably had 300 plus people there. We've heard from thousands of people, and which is why I'm encouraged about the voter support.
We'll also hear from a county supervisor who will vote next week on whether to take the proposal to voters later this year. Plus, our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. Pima County may have a bond election later this year, and the implications affect everyone who lives here. Before we get to our interviews about the details, let's look at what it means and what's happened in the past. First things first, what is a bond? It's a voter-approved government borrowing. Pima County asks voters if it can borrow a designated amount of money. Voters then decide whether they want to raise their property taxes to pay back the loan during a set length of time. Voters have approved bonds at the ballot box several times in the last decade. They ranged from hundreds of millions of dollars in 1997 and 2004 for a range of project types to much smaller amounts to build psychiatric care facilities in 2006 and last year $22 million to expand the Pima Animal Care Center. Next week, the Board of Supervisors will consider calling another bond election. The supervisors created a citizens commission to sort through hundreds of proposals for borrowed funding and how much money to spend. That commission recommended the county ask voters to approve borrowing $653 million to pay for 96 projects. County Administrator Chuck Huckleberry wants more, and he is asking the supervisors to go to voters for $160 million for roads that the Bond Advisory Committee did not include in its recommendation. He also added some smaller dollar projects, so he's suggesting the supervisors approve $815 million in borrowing. The supervisors will consider these requests Tuesday. The board's options are to accept one of the two recommendations to send to voters in November, or to make changes and send its own version to voters. Or the board can decide not to hold an election. Now for some nuts and bolts of the bond proposal process. This week I interviewed the chairman of the County Bond Advisory Committee about how his group came up with a list of projects. Larry, your committee spent 9 years debating and puzzling through the projects that could be on the ballot later this year. How did you whittle down the list, and how did you spend that time getting to the point you're at now?
Well, it was 9 years intermittently. We started out with $3 billion worth of projects, very important projects. There's some tremendous capital needs in our community, and we were well on our way to putting together a package to recommend, and the recession hit. And bonds are repaid with secondary property tax revenues, and property values went down in Pima County. So it didn't make sense to talk about issuing bonds until the economy started to recover. So we've been going at it now pretty diligently for the last 3 or 4 years. We started originally with $3 billion, then we whittled it down to $1 billion, and now we're down to about $650 million. And it was a very, very difficult process because these projects are so important to the community.
You mentioned the economic recession and the reality of trying to get voters to approve raising their own taxes as they are going through other economic situations in their lives. How close did the committee get to making recommendations to the supervisors to hold an election along the way? Were there several times you debated that, the timing?
No, we realized that it was going to be, we were in for a process. And this is consistent with the timeline we sort of set for ourselves when we started meeting again to develop the package.
So you mentioned that the Bond Advisory Committee is recommending about $650 million in projects, recommending that the supervisors send those to voters to consider. County Administrator Chuck Huckleberry added to that, and he's recommending a package of about $815 million. Why didn't the committee include specifically the road project money that he included in his recommendation?
I think primarily because it hadn't been an item that we'd originally started to discuss. It's been mentioned, and we did have one meeting where we discussed it, but historically, road projects have been funded with user revenues, highway user revenue funds, as opposed to general obligation bonds. But that avenue was shut down, so we had to look to other sources of funding for the road projects. very, very important need, crying need for road repair funds. And it was something that we just hadn't focused on in our deliberations.
So how do you feel about the distinction between those two proposals? The Bond Advisory Committee recommending $650 million, Chuck Huckleberry recommending $815 million, and the Board of Supervisors on Tuesday looking at both.
Yeah, in my mind, it's a function of the impact that it would have on the taxpayers. And Mr. Huckleberry's recommendation spreads out the tax burden over a period of time where I don't think it'll be onerous on the taxpayers. I'm comfortable with his recommendation. Again, just because of the important needs that are out there. We need to do something about roads. We need to do something about the other capital needs of the community. This seems to be the fairest and most equitable way to deal with it.
Now, the Bond Advisory Committee has 25 members. They're from all over different parts of the community. And lest we not give the impression that you were always all the time unanimous, how did you work out differences on which projects would make it into the plan?
This was a very fulfilling and rewarding experience for me personally. We have 25 people coming from different walks of life, different parts of the community, representing different constituencies. And each person had things that they felt were most important to them. So we had some lively discussions in the many times that we've met in the last 2 years. And at the end of the day, I think the committee came together, just as hopefully the community will, and realized that nobody's going to get everything they want, but everyone will get something. Everyone will benefit from this package. And it was really a very positive experience for me to see how people were able to put aside their own personal views and work with other people to recommend something for the good of the entire community.
How did you get to that point? Just personally, how do you decide when you're taking votes on the projects, which ones are worth the funding recommendation and which ones you have to give up?
Well, it just compromise. Just compromise and fairness and realizing that other people are part of this community too, and they deserve to be to receive some of the benefits of these bonds. It's just the way we should be solving our community problems. With compromise and conciliation. And
the Board of Supervisors, again, we'll talk about this on Tuesday. Did you get a lot of people coming to the Bond Advisory Committee meetings to talk about the projects they wanted to support? Do you think there will be people at Tuesday's meeting?
Oh, my guess is Tuesday's meeting will be packed. We've met 19 times in the last 2 years. On average, we probably had 300 plus people there. We've heard from thousands of people, and which is why I'm encouraged about the voter support. There's a lot of support for what we'll be recommending to the Board of Supervisors. I think Tuesday's meeting will be packed. I think it'll be standing room only.
Thanks for coming in to share your thoughts on this. I also spoke with County Supervisor Sharon Bronson. She's chairwoman of the Board of Supervisors, so she'll vote next week on whether to send a bond election to the November ballot. Supervisor Bronson, in February, when we first found out that the Board of Supervisors would be taking a vote in the next few months on whether to hold a bond election, you had a little bit of hesitation. Can you tell us what that was about?
I think the hesitation was at that point we had no idea what the state budget was going to look like and what kind of cost shifts would then come to counties, Pima County. As it turns out, Pima County got a $23 million, it looks like, cost shift. So that's significant in terms of our budget and the services that we provide. And I think the other reason I was a little hesitant, or was hesitant, was because of the amount of the package. At that point, it was around $650 million. There was nothing in it for roads at all. And today, the package that we were handed that we will be discussing on Tuesday is now up to $815 million, but does include about $200 million for roads. So that piece of the bond package, I think, is certainly something we need to look at closely.
The road part.
The road part. I mean, it's divided into 7 questions, but we've got to fix our roads, and I think that's got to be a top priority. So that's the discussion we'll be having on Tuesday.
And just to clarify, those 7 questions you mentioned, each one is a different topic area for funding. So voters could say, I'm going to vote down the parks money, but I'm going to vote for the roads money, correct?
Yes, there'll be 7 questions, and I think that's why it might be plausible to put it before the voters, because they'll have the opportunity to accept or reject the 7 each individually. So that gives us more flexibility. If it were all or nothing, I definitely wouldn't support it.
How do you feel about the total dollar figure, the $815 million as the total request to voters?
I am still hesitant about that, although as we started looking at the financials, we can hold the secondary tax rate at about 81 cents, or it would never go above that. So it is fiscally doable. I don't know what kind of appetite the voters would have for that amount, because it's a large amount. It's almost $1 billion.
Now, past bond packages have also been split into several questions, but they tended to pass all or nothing. Voters either said yes to all of them or no to most. Actually, they've mostly said yes to all of them. Does that help the case?
Well, they have said yes. You're absolutely correct. But that was pre-2008 and the Great Recession. We have not come back strong from that recession. We are still in recovery mode. We have many, many infrastructure issues we have to address. So I am not sure we're going to see a repeat scenario should the voters get the bond packet because of the economy.
Now, the Board of Supervisors and the county has been criticized from time to time during the budgeting cycles for choosing to enlist this much debt, debt to do these capital projects like roads or parks or community centers or flood control. And the comparison has been made that other counties don't go into as much debt to do this. What's your response to that?
My response is that's not factually correct. In terms of other cities, counties, and towns, the debt burden per capita in a number of instances is higher than Pima County's. Even here locally, whether we look at Marana or other communities, we're going to see a higher per capita debt. And the reality is we do not have the assessed valuation that Maricopa County has. We are the only county without a sales tax. Our only source of general fund revenue, our only ability to invest in infrastructure is through taking on debt. We have no other alternative.
I just want to clarify, when you said no sales tax, we do have the half-cent RTA to sales tax to pay for roads.
But the county does not have a sales tax.
Not a general one for
we
the
don't
county
have
budget.
No, we do not have we are the only county. We have no diversified revenue stream. That's troublesome.
So the board's decision on Tuesday is to accept either the $650 million proposal, the $815 million proposal, to take either of those and change them, tweak them a bit, or say no altogether. What's your inclination at this point?
I think my inclination at this point is to listen to the people who show up on Tuesday, take their temperature. I certainly am going to be supporting the transportation piece, the roads. I think economic development, job enhancement, that's something we need to invest in if we're going to have a future in this community. But again, because it is divided into 7 questions and voters have the opportunity to choose, I may be inclined to accept all 7 questions, but I still am a little taken aback by the amount. It does seem big, but honestly, as we look at our financial situation in Pima County, it's something we can do. The question is, should we do it?
And Tuesday is the voters' chance to talk to you, the Board of Supervisors, about what they want to see, whether they want this on the ballot at all.
Yeah, and I think if we're going to put it on the ballot, we have to make that decision Tuesday. So I don't know what that's going to be. There are 4 other board members. But again, it's not unilaterally adopting it. It would be giving voters a choice to say up or down. And again, I think for me, the most important things are roads and economic development.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Christopher Conover. Next on Arizona Week, the state of Arizona water.
Arizona has planned very well for these kind of shortages, and so we're in much better shape than California, for example.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio this week are Patrick McNamara of the Arizona Daily Star, Thelma Grimes of Tucson Local Media, and Dan Shearer of the Green Valley News and Sahuarita Sun. Thank you all for coming in. Patrick, we'll start with you and we'll talk a little bit more about bonds. You've been covering the process since you're the county reporter at the Arizona Daily Star. Has it been going just as Larry Hecker described?
Yeah, I think so. It's been a long process. Towards the end in February, I think there were some meetings of the Bond Advisory Committee, and some of the members were upset with the changes that Mr. Hecker and co-chair Carolyn Campbell, along with County Administrator Chuck Huckleberry, made, taking some projects off, changing the dollar amounts. But I think for the most part, it's gone as well as it could for such a long process.
In the scheme of things, those changes they proposed, were those looked at as kind of last-minute changes, or were they typical of the changes the board makes at any meeting?
Well, I think some of the members thought it was last-minute kind of backroom changes because it was 3 members of the committee, not the entire Bond Advisory Committee, making the changes. However, in the larger scheme, there were smaller changes, considering that it's now $815 million package.
And we heard from Supervisor Bronson about how she's still a little apprehensive, unsure what voters might want to do with the dollar amount being what it is. What reaction have you been hearing from the other 4 supervisors on the board?
Well, all of them are concerned with roads in the community and said that's the biggest issue. The only supervisor who said specifically how she would vote is Supervisor Allie Miller, who said she will not support putting the bond package to voters. And her concern is mostly the county's current debt load, taxes, and some of the issues from the cost shifts from the state that are still undetermined, the 1% homeowners property tax cap and other issues that could cost the county up to $23 million in the future. So for that reason, she said she's not going to support the package. The other members haven't said specifically, but Supervisor Ramon Valadez was the one who proposed the $160 million now road package. And he also said that his constituents are very concerned with roads and said it seems to be a big issue on everyone's mind.
You also write the Roadrunner column for the Arizona Daily Star, so you hear about how much people want their roads fixed.
That's right. Yeah, potholes are a big concern of everyone in the community.
And Dan, what's the reaction coming from Green Valley so far on this proposal?
Well, in Green Valley and Sahuarita, I think they're glad to see the road money in there, but I think an $800 million plus bond is still going to be a very tough sell down there, and for a couple of reasons. One, we know the county budget is in trouble. The county is in trouble. And number 2, I think there are a couple of issues on there that are going to appear on the bond that people are going to view as important, but maybe now is not the time. And I think one of those is going to be the open space. If you look at 1997, I think 2004, we gave more than $200 million to open space. And people are going to say, wait a minute, to Sharon Bronson's point, where is the help for the economy in this $800 million bond? That's going to be the big question. I don't think they're ready for it, to be honest with you.
Now, we have seen in past bond elections that there can be a lack of support from some geographic areas if there aren't enough projects in those areas. Is there any concern from Sahuarita and Green Valley that there aren't enough projects in that geographic area?
I think overall the Bond Advisory Committee was very good to our area, and it is a growing area and it's deserving. And so what I'm hoping is that people will take each of those 7 issues on their own merit and vote up or down on them, and will consider the county as a whole. I think that's what's important. My fear is that people are going to see 7 issues or 7 bond choices, but one issue, and that issue is debt. And I don't know that our people are going to be able to get over that, ultimately.
Thelma, response from the business community. Have they come out talking about this proposal yet? Of course, we don't know if it's on the ballot, so.
Right, I haven't heard a ton of feedback on the business side, but I will say this, if you look at last year when the county looked at increasing property taxes by 17%, all of the chambers came out against it, all the businesses came out against it. But I think on this level, when it comes to infrastructure and roads, that is what the business community is complaining about most. We don't get expanded businesses because they can't expand on these roads. So we don't get businesses moving here because of our infrastructure roads. So I think that'll help it, but at the same time, when someone wants to move here, or say a business is looking at Pima County, they're also going to look at the tax rate.
And they also, as Dan mentioned, look at economic development initiatives. And Dan mentioned a possible concern that there's not enough of those, although there are some. There's some expansions of some job training facilities, but maybe not direct infusions of cash into the business industry. Any response yet from construction companies that could be involved in the construction?
Not that I've heard directly, but they're always in favor of these. They get, they get projects, they get to hire more employees. It brings in more in terms of their trade. So they're going to be in favor of it mostly.
All right, I'm going to switch to another topic that we'll talk to Thelma and Patrick about, which is the prospect of widening Broadway from downtown, essentially, from Euclid to Country Club. That's been a controversial project. It's one of the projects in the Regional Transportation Authority, and I believe it also got bond funding in a past bond package. Thelma, we've seen an alignment proposal, and we've started hearing reaction from businesses. What are we hearing on the street at this point?
And that's what Inside Tucson Business went out this last week and really looked at is what does it do to the businesses? And you got 37 property owners out there that over the last 20 years this has been talked about. So they're kind of hesitant. What is going to happen? They're anxious. They want to know what the true answers is. One project was we're going to widen it to 6 lanes, big sidewalks this, then that changed, then it's changed again. And then you also have some business owners saying they don't think this project is needed at all. They just think a more efficient method with right lane turns and bus lanes is needed.
Why is there so much uncertainty about where this road will go when it's widened?
I think it has to do with future growth and that kind of thing, and I think there's uncertainty on what to do with Broadway.
Projections about how the community will grow. All right, and then Patrick, we are hearing from city officials that there is a commitment to widen this road, to keep the promise made to voters. Why that angle of this? Why is the city so committed to that?
Well, voters did approve it in the 2006 RTA project. What the plan now, or the proposal now, is altered from the original, I think, 6 lanes of travel and 2 dedicated bus lanes. Now it's not going to be as elaborate. And there were neighborhood concerns about the city, demolishing properties and, encroaching on closer into neighborhoods and these types of issues. The city as well, though, has an interest in the project because they've invested millions of dollars in property already, mostly on the north side of Broadway, to make way for this planned widening. So I think that's the main reasons why the city wants to go forward with it. And the county is obligated, I think, to $25 million to this project as well. So I don't think there's a question of if it's going to go forward. It's just what it will look like when it finally does.
What's the status of it right now? What still needs to happen before actually construction begins?
Well, I think there's some more community meetings that are planned, and I think the council has to go forward as well. But it's not something that's in the immediate future. That's for sure.
Which, Thelma, is one of the concerns of the property owners and the business owners along the road is that there's no date.
Right. One of the business owners we talked to said he owns a sign company and most of his business is done by phone, so he's fine with it. He's not as anxious. But then his wife owns a gift shop, and hers is walk-in business, and she's directly affected, and they don't know 1 year to the next what they should do. Should they move? Should they close? Should they wait it out? Getting no answers is actually just as stressful as, actually seeing the project go through.
And some businesses feel pretty certain that they will be affected, as in demolished, when the road goes through, but they don't know when.
Right, and that's the big question. Every year, new projects, new ideas, and they still don't know what it means to them.
All right, well, another big picture topic that we've been discussing week after week and we're going to keep discussing is the Pima County budget. And Patrick, the county is in the midst of a number of hearings about specific components in the budget. Last Tuesday was one, next Tuesday is another one. What happened this past week?
Well, this week there wasn't any grand revelations from the budget presentations from some of the departments that were there. There was more talk about the potential costs now associated with the presidential preference election, which county officials say could now cost directly $1.2 million because the state decided that they'll only reimburse counties $1.25 per registered voter to hold the election, whereas previously for the presidential preference election, which is conducted for the political parties, it was a full reimbursement. So that was one of the issues discussed. And another thing was, in the previous meeting, Mr. Huckleberry had talked with some of the department heads about their budgets for the future. And they had originally planned to cut 2% out of their budgets, and now he suggested they should be prepared to add an additional 4% cuts. So I think that was some news to some of them, and we'll see what happens when they come back with additional proposals and when we get the full proposed budget.
So at this point, the departments are proposing their budgets to the board, and then at the end of the month, we're expecting County Administrator Chuck Huckleberry to come out with his overall budget proposal. That's right?
That's the plan.
So there could be tweaks in that to what the departments themselves are requesting.
Oh yeah, there probably will be. I don't think that anything would be huge changes, but I think that probably some adjustments would be seen. One of the things that Mr. Huckleberry had told some of the department heads at the previous meeting was that for years a lot of departments have kept full-time equivalent employee figures on their budgets when they don't actually have all those positions filled. And the additional money they're allocated to pay salaries would then go into different parts of their budget. And now they're trying to figure out exactly how many of those types of positions there are so they can actually eliminate full-time employee positions and eliminate those costs associated with them.
So for the departments, it's been a way to kind of keep a little bit of money in the budget, even though you're not using it the way
Yeah,
you
exactly.
said you would.
You know,
Okay.
they're budgeted for a set amount of full-time employees when they don't quite meet that, so they still get the funding for it, and it's used for other purposes.
Dan, the county budget, is there still room to cut this potential 6% cut in every department's budget?
That's a big question. Is there fat in it? Well, let's go back to the 2014 budget and take a look at that question. In 2014, the supervisors passed a budget that included the tax hike, by the way, and they held aside $24 million, and they told a handful of departments, if you need extra money, you have to justify to us that you need it, and then we'll give you a cut out of this $24 million. That tells me that the county doesn't know that the departments are using all of our money wisely, because I was under the assumption that every penny in every department should have to be justified. Instead, they held aside this contingency fund for that. Is there fat? Absolutely, there's fat. And Patrick just pointed out where some of it could be. I bet a lot of it's on the administrative level. Yeah, there's a lot of fat there.
Now, one of the reasons that the county is looking to make budget cuts is that the state budget is shifting up $23 million in costs to the counties. We've heard a lot of the county has to make cuts because of the state. That's been a routine talking point for years. Is that really the reason? Do you buy into that?
Well, what did we just hear Sharon Bronson say? Well, we had to wait for the state budget to be finalized to know whether we go forward with the bond, or the state just dumped $23 million of burden on us, so we're going to increase the bond to $160 million. That just didn't make sense to me. So yes, it is a burden. There's no doubt about it. The question is, do we want to bring a bigger burden on through $800 million in bonds? That's a big question, and if it goes before voters, which I believe it will, I'm very curious to see how this will play.
Now, your newspaper talked to some of the Southern Arizona lawmakers about how the legislative session went. What did they have to say about the state budgeting process?
I think everybody agrees that the state legislative session was a whirlwind. It was just, we have one Republican and two Democrats down where we are, and it went fast. And I think we learned a little thing about the governor, and that is that he's not real big on collaboration. He's not necessarily a bully, but he has decided the way things are going to be, and the Republicans obviously ruled the roost at the session, and he's just going to jam it on through. So that budget would have gone through anyway because the Republicans were so dominant. So, but it was a whirlwind, and it was they're still catching their breath from it.
I was just going to add, we talked to District 9 Representative Victoria Still, and she's a Democrat, and she kind of described it the same way. It went really fast. Democrats barely could even get bills in there to be heard. And that it just seemed like the governor put some directives forward, they were followed, and we were done.
Now, Thelma, I want to switch topics but keep you in the spot for a moment, and that is to talk about the latest efforts to increase trade relations between Arizona businesses and Mexican businesses. Now, in Inside Tucson Business this week, there is an article by the Tucson Hispanic Chamber of Commerce President Leah Marquez Peterson about a recent trip to Guaymas for that purpose. What's the latest in those efforts?
Right, she kind of shared some information on a trip they took. It was a 3-day trip where they talked to business leaders. They got some special tours of the port, and they talked about what Tucson and we could do. And right now, the port up there can take 100 million tons. Right now, they're only doing 70 million tons, so the potential's there.
Now, who went on that trip? What was the purpose of that
It was a
trip?
group of business leaders that the Hispanic Chamber takes, and they're trying to take this proactive approach to start increasing discussions between the two neighboring countries.
How does that build into sort of the bigger picture of U.S. and Mexican trade propositions to increase that here?
Well, I think the one thing she pointed out there is this one port connects Pacific Ocean with North America, and it can be really utilized, and with our infrastructure in terms of interstate and that kind of thing here, it can be helpful on our side.
That's another topic we will keep an eye on. Thank you all for coming in this week. That's our show. Thanks for watching. Before we go, we want to remind you that our website houses all of the stories we produce at Arizona Public Media, including those that aired on our other TV shows and on the radio on NPR 89.1. Next, Arizona Week explores water issues throughout the state.